The glass shattered before it hit the floor. "You're not serious," Daniel barked, his voice cracking with disbelief. "You can't force me to marry some farmer." Victor Hale, tycoon, billionaire, and father of the most entitled 27-year-old in New York, didn't flinch. He leaned back in his leather chair, eyes cold, voice low. "I'm deadly serious. Her name is Lena. She's 63 years old. You're marrying her. In 2 weeks." Daniel stared, blood draining from his face. This was no prank, no reality show stunt. His father, strategic, ruthless, always in control, was making good on a threat he'd brushed off for years. "I told you," Victor said. "The day your arrogance became dangerous to others, I'd humble you myself." And so began a battle neither father nor son expected to lose so much in. Daniel had never met a woman like Lena. Not because she was old enough to be his grandmother. Not even because she lived in a crumbling farmhouse miles from the nearest Starbucks. But because she looked at him without fear, pity, or interest. Just quiet disappointment. "You're not what I hoped for," she said on the first day. "Same," Daniel muttered. She handed him a rusty bucket. "Well, cows don't milk themselves." It had all started with a string of disasters. DUI, public brawls, $500,000 blown on poker and models in Ibiza, and finally, that viral video of him mocking an elderly homeless man on the street. Victor had watched in silence. No amount of PR could bury his son's rot. So he gave him an ultimatum. Live with her for 6 months. Be her husband in name. No staff. No money. No phone. You leave, you lose your inheritance. Daniel laughed in his father's face. Then the money froze. The penthouse was locked. The Bentley towed. And a private jet dropped him along with one suitcase into a field smelling of manure. Lena Morgan lived simply, but not quietly. She woke at 5. She prayed. She worked. And she made sure Daniel did too. He slept in a cot in the barn for the first week. She called him city boy like it was a slur. He called her grandma to irritate her. They barely spoke. But slowly something shifted. He noticed how her hands moved gently when she fed the animals. How the townsfolk greeted her like family. How she hummed old songs while chopping vegetables from her garden. She noticed the blisters on his hands. How he stopped complaining by week 3. How he gave his sandwich to a hungry kid who passed by the fence. By month 2, Daniel's body had changed. He was leaner, sunburned, stronger. But it was his heart that changed the most. One night, over soup and silence, Lena asked, "What did you want to be before all the noise?" He stared at the flickering candle. "A teacher," he said quietly. Lena paused. "You'd have been a good one." No mockery. No sarcasm. Just belief. It was the first honest moment he'd shared with anyone in years. Victor watched from afar. His spies sent daily updates. He expected rage, rebellion, collapse. Instead, they reported, "He's working. Quietly. Sometimes he smiles." Victor felt something tighten in his chest. He hadn't meant for this to change the boy. Just scare him. But Daniel was becoming someone Victor no longer recognized. Or maybe someone he had once hoped his son could be. 2 months in, Daniel found an old photo of Lena. She was young, beautiful, laughing, in the arms of a soldier. "He died in Nam," she said softly, seeing the photo. "Only man I ever loved." "So why do this?" he asked. "Why agree to this circus with me?" Lena's eyes were steady. "Because your father saved my farm 10 years ago. Told me one day he'd ask for a favor. This is it." Daniel blinked. "This isn't a favor. It's punishment." "No," Lena said. "It's grace. Just wrapped in thorns." By the end of month 3, Daniel didn't want to leave. Not because he loved Lena, but because he respected her. And maybe, just maybe, he'd started to respect himself. The morning of the town harvest fair was cold and gold. Mist clung low to the fields like a secret that hadn't yet decided if it would stay or lift. Daniel buttoned the last clasp on his borrowed flannel and stepped out of the barn just as Lena came around the corner, balancing a crate of homemade pies. Help or stare? She asked, eyes dancing. He grabbed the other end of the crate without a word. They walked side by side down the gravel path toward the truck she hadn't driven in weeks. She'd let Daniel take the wheel that day, and she hadn't said it, but he'd seen the trust in her silence. The town fair was small. Booths lined the main street like old friends meeting again after a long winter. Kids ran barefoot through the dust, faces sticky with caramel and joy. Fiddles played. Old men danced. Strangers laughed like family. Daniel had never been in a place that felt like this. Not in the marble halls of the penthouse. Not in the nightclubs of Milan. Not even in his own home, where his voice had echoed more than it had ever been heard. Lena set up her pies with quiet precision. People came in waves, some out of curiosity, others out of loyalty. She knew all their names. They all knew hers. He watched a little girl hug her legs and call her Nana Lena. Watched a man with a crooked back slip her a bundle of herbs in exchange for a pie. Watched Lena give away more than she sold. "You'll go broke," he muttered. "I'll sleep just fine," she replied. He smiled. He didn't know he had that in him anymore. Around noon, the mayor waddled up with his usual red suspenders and booming laugh. "Well now, if it isn't the city prince turned farmer," he said, clapping Daniel on the back. "Heard you wrangled a runaway cow last week." Daniel blushed. "I was the one running. The cow just watched." Laughter burst around them. Someone shouted, "Daniel, grab a fiddle." "I don't play," he protested. "Don't worry," Lena called from the booth. "They don't either." They cheered until he grabbed a fake one and mimicked wildly, drawing more laughter. That was the moment someone snapped a photo. The moment his fake marriage, his real transformation, went viral. Victor saw the picture within hours. Daniel, in flannel, covered in dust, pretending to play a fiddle, surrounded by smiling strangers. Lena stood in the background, hands folded, eyes watching the boy like a gardener watching something finally bloom. The post had over 800,000 likes within a day. Victor stared at it long into the night. Then he picked up the phone. Week after week, Daniel changed more. He rose earlier than Lena. Learned to mend fences, knead bread, rotate crops. He gave away his designer watch to a teen saving up for his first guitar. He let a lonely widower cry on his shoulder at the Sunday market. He stayed up fixing the roof when a storm tore it in half. He still cursed, still lost his temper, still burned the biscuits. But he was trying, and that made all the difference. Lena watched it all, quiet, steady, soft-eyed. One late October night, as leaves danced like fire through the wind, Lena collapsed in the kitchen. Daniel caught her before she hit the ground. She was burning, shaking, barely breathing. They got her to the hospital just before dawn. Pneumonia. Severe. Maybe worse. He didn't sleep. Not that night. Not the next. He sat beside her bed, holding the same hands that had once held his dignity in place. "Don't you leave," he whispered once, voice cracking. "Not before I say thank you." She didn't open her eyes. Victor Hale stood outside the hospital room 2 days later. He hadn't called, hadn't warned, just appeared. Daniel looked up, exhausted and hollow-eyed. "She might not make it," he said flatly. Victor didn't respond, just stood there, gaze fixed on the woman lying motionless beneath wires and beeping machines. "I didn't think this would happen," he finally said. "Did you think anything?" Daniel snapped. "You used her." "I used you." Daniel stood. His voice was low, ragged. "She's the only real thing that's ever happened to me. And if she dies thinking this was all just some trick." "She knew," Victor interrupted. Daniel froze. "She knew it was about you, not her." She agreed anyway. Daniel sat again. The silence between father and son was heavier than all their years apart. After a long moment, Victor spoke. "She taught you." "No," Daniel said softly. "She loved me. Not like a wife. Not like family. But like someone who saw something in me. Worth saving." Victor looked away. His throat worked like he wanted to say something, but couldn't. Finally, he turned to leave. "She wakes up," he said. "You bring her home. You stay." As long as she lets you. Lena woke the next morning. She found Daniel asleep beside her, fingers loosely wrapped around her blanket. "You snore," she whispered. He startled awake, eyes wide. And then he laughed. Loud, uncontrolled, tears rolling down his face. "You scared me, old woman," he said, voice cracking. "You needed a little shaking." Winter came. Daniel didn't leave. Not after 6 months. Not even after Victor returned to tell him his inheritance was restored, his assets unfrozen, his city life waiting. "I'm not done learning," Daniel said. And Victor, for once, didn't argue. He just nodded. Quiet. Almost proud. 1 year later, Daniel stood in front of a class of teenagers in the town's small high school. He wore a corduroy jacket and carried a stack of literature books under his arm. "Mr. Hale," one of them whispered in awe, "is it true you were, like, super rich?" He smiled. "I was super lost." They stared. "And I'm still figuring things out. But I know 2 things. 1, commas save lives. 2." He looked out the window, where Lena waited in the truck with a thermos and a smile. Grace comes in unexpected packaging. Back at the farm that night, Lena sat by the fire. "You're going to leave one day," she said. "Maybe," Daniel said. "But I'll never forget what you gave me." She nodded. "I didn't give you anything. I just pointed you toward the mirror." He looked at her, the lines on her face, the wear in her hands. And he saw the most beautiful soul he'd ever known. "You were the mirror," he whispered. And in the quiet, between the crackle of firewood and the hum of crickets, 2 unlikely hearts sat in peace, knowing that sometimes the most important love in life isn't romantic, it's redemptive. It doesn't sweep you off your feet. It plants them on the ground. Spring rolled in like a gentle apology after a long, cold silence. The farm bloomed in soft pinks and vibrant greens. Birds nested in the barn rafters again. Lena's garden exploded with color, and Daniel grew with it. The town barely remembered he hadn't always belonged there. He fixed their fences, taught their kids, even ran for the town council, and lost by 4 votes to a 78-year-old veteran named Clive, who offered him whiskey as consolation. But something else was blooming, too quieter, deeper. Daniel had started writing. At first, it was just scribbles, bits of thoughts, sentences he didn't want to forget, then full pages, then chapters. Lena noticed the notebook long before he realized she had. "You're not just becoming who you were meant to be," she said one evening as they shelled peas on the porch. "You're remembering who you already were." He looked down at his calloused hands. "Feels like it took losing everything to figure that out. Or gaining the right things." That summer, Victor returned. He didn't announce his visit. Just showed up at the fair again, same suspenders, different purpose. This time, he stood quietly at the back while Daniel read aloud from his first published story at the local library. It was fiction, but everyone in the room knew it was really about Lena. About redemption. About growing up too late but just in time. Victor stayed after the crowd cleared. They stood by the lemonade table. For a while, neither said a word. "You wrote well," Victor said. Daniel nodded. "I didn't know I could." "Not really." "I did." Daniel turned. "You did?" Victor shrugged, awkward. "You used to read for hours when you were little. Before the nannies. Before the tutors. Before the world taught us both to be colder than we needed to be." A long pause. "I didn't know how to be your father," Victor admitted. "I only knew how to build things. Control things. You didn't fit the plan." Daniel looked at him, finally seeing the man, not the machine. "Neither did you." That night, Victor didn't fly back. He slept on the sofa in Lena's guest room. And in the morning, for the first time in 20 years, he helped someone make pancakes. Months passed. Life unfolded quietly, sweetly. And then, one morning in October, Lena didn't come downstairs. Daniel found her sitting in her rocker, eyes closed, the morning sun pouring across her face like a final blessing. She was gone, peacefully, as if she'd always known the exact time. Daniel didn't cry at first. He made the calls, organized the burial, chose the hymn she always hummed. Wrote the eulogy. Delivered it. She wasn't my wife, he said, voice steady before a sea of mourners. She wasn't my blood. But she became the part of me I didn't know I was missing. She didn't raise me as a child, but she taught me how to be a man. When the casket lowered into the earth, Daniel finally broke. He wept like a son, the kind of weeping that only comes when you've truly been loved. Victor stood behind him, one hand on his shoulder. No words, just presence. Lena left the farm to Daniel. Everything. The house, the land, her old, creaky truck, even her recipe for blackberry jam, which she'd once sworn she'd take to the grave. She also left a letter, handwritten, folded inside her Bible. Daniel opened it alone, one evening as the wind howled through the orchard. Daniel, if you're reading this, you finally stopped running. You were never meant to be anyone's shadow, not even your father's. Your light, all your own. You always were. I didn't teach you much, just gave you time and space. The seed was always there. You just needed good soil. You'll want to go soon. I know that. You're a wanderer. But remember, wherever you go, you carry me. And this place. And everything you learned while pretending not to care. One last thing, write your story. All of it. The ugly. The foolish. The funny. The broken. People need it. Someone out there needs to see it's never too late to be kind. I'll be watching from a place with better sunsets. Love always. Lena. Daniel didn't leave the farm. Not yet. But he did write. He wrote every morning before the rooster crowed and every night after the fire dimmed. His first novella, fictionalized version of his strange marriage, became a quiet bestseller. Not flashy, not viral, but passed hand to hand like a secret gift. He called it the farmer's lesson. People wrote to him. Hundreds. Thousands. Recovering addicts. Estranged fathers. Lost sons. Lonely elders. I saw myself in this, they said. You gave me hope. Daniel never responded with anything long. Usually just one sentence. So did she. Victor bought a small house on the edge of town 6 months after Lena's funeral. He came to every town meeting, every church dinner, learned to bake bread badly, but proudly. He and Daniel didn't speak like father and son yet, but they spoke, and listened, and built a second chance, one small act at a time. One evening, they stood under the same apple tree where Lena had once scolded Daniel for forgetting to water the roots. Victor looked up. She was right, he said. About what? Daniel asked. Victor bent down, touched the soil. Everything grows better when you stop trying to control it. Daniel smiled. She'd say you finally passed the test. Victor shook his head. She'd say I cheated. You were the real answer all along. Time passed. One day, Daniel stood in front of a crowd at a university podium. A guest lecturer now. A best-selling author. A once rich son who'd nearly lost himself before an old woman taught him how to live. He opened his talk with just one line. Sometimes the greatest teachers wear aprons and boots and call you out on your nonsense before they call you by your name. The audience laughed. Then he told them the story. Not of a billionaire. Not of a punishment. But of a gift. Wrapped in flannel. Tied with silence. Delivered on a dirt road. That ended up leading home. That autumn, the trees turned amber and rust like every year. But everything felt different. The farm didn't echo the same without Lena's humming in the kitchen or her footstep creak on the porch. Still, Daniel stayed. He hosted neighborhood kids on weekends, teaching them how to plant, how to read the wind. He built a small shed behind the barn and turned it into a quiet writing room. And on cold nights, he'd light the fireplace and reread the letter Lena left each time, discovering a line he swore wasn't there before. One foggy morning, a stranger showed up at the edge of the property. She was maybe 50, in a navy coat and polished shoes, a city woman trying hard not to slip in the mud. I'm looking for Lena Morgan, she said. Daniel walked her to the porch. She passed last year. The woman looked down, then slowly pulled something from her coat. A photo. Lena, holding a newborn baby wrapped in a blue quilt. I'm her daughter, the woman whispered. Daniel's mind reeled. Lena had never mentioned a daughter. Not once. The woman's name was Angela. She had been adopted at birth, raised across the country, had only begun to trace her biological roots after her own children left for college. I found her name, she said, voice tight with emotion. I wasn't sure I wanted to know, but something in me said, try. Daniel brought her inside, showed her Lena's room, untouched, her worn Bible, the cane she refused to use until the last month. Angela sat for hours, sometimes talking, mostly crying. They drank black coffee and peeled apples while the past hung in the air like old perfume. She didn't forget you, Daniel finally said. She just carried pain differently. Angela nodded slowly. So do I. They hugged on the porch before she left. And Daniel, watching her drive away, felt something else settle in his chest. Lena had left more seeds behind than anyone realized. That winter, Daniel visited his old penthouse. Victor had never sold it. Didn't feel right, he said. Felt like burying a piece of history. Daniel walked through its marble floors, glass walls, cold silence. Everything gleamed. Nothing felt alive. His old bedroom was untouched. The closet still held clothes he wouldn't wear now if they paid him. He found a letter in the top drawer. His own handwriting. Written years ago, in college. Dear me, when I make it big. I hope you're happy. I hope you're kind. I hope you remember that real love has nothing to do with money. And if you forget, I hope someone reminds you. Daniel stared at the note for a long time. Then he folded it, slipped it into his coat, and locked the door behind him. By the next spring, Daniel's second book hit the shelves. The Soil Remembers, a collection of essays, fiction, and memories rooted in the lessons of the farm, the town, Lena, and the small miracles of change. It became a national bestseller. Not because it was flashy, but because it was true. People found pieces of themselves in it. Mothers passed it to daughters. Sons read it in rehab. Teachers put it on classroom shelves. At a book signing in Chicago, a young man approached him, shaking. I was going to end everything last year, he said. Then I read about Lena. Daniel looked him in the eyes. Lena would have told you the world still needs your story. The young man nodded, tears streaming. And just like that, one more life didn't slip away. On the 3rd anniversary of Lena's passing, the town held a memorial under the old oak tree. They planted flowers around the base and placed a bronze plaque in the grass. Lena Morgan. She planted more than seeds. She grew people. Daniel spoke last. He told the story again, not as a fairy tale, not as a punishment turned blessing, but as proof that one soul, quietly persistent, can save another from becoming lost forever. And when the sun began to set over the field, he opened the basket he'd brought from the house. Inside were paper envelopes, hundreds of them. One for every person who had written to him. Inside each, a handwritten reply, a word of hope, a reminder of grace. As people took them, Daniel whispered to no one in particular. She'd say the story's not done. Later that night, Daniel sat on the porch, alone. Victor joined him, 2 mugs of tea in hand. You ever miss the city? Victor asked. Daniel shook his head. I don't miss who I was in it. A long pause. The kind that only sits between men who've finally forgiven each other. She would have been proud, Victor said. Daniel looked up at the stars. She already was. Victor smiled. I want to ask you something, he said. If I start something for kids like you once were, lost, arrogant, aimless, would you help me run it? Daniel turned, eyebrows raised. You? A redemption project? Victor chuckled. Let's call it replanting. Daniel held out his hand. Deal. The next year, they opened the Morgan Foundation. It wasn't flashy. No golden signs. Just an old barn restored into a learning center. They brought in city kids. Taught them about the soil, the silence, the sweat. Daniel read them stories under the stars. Victor showed them how to build things with their hands. And sometimes, in quiet moments, one of the kids would ask, Who's Lena? And Daniel would smile. She's why we're all here. Summer returned like an old friend. The Morgan Foundation thrived. What started as a modest program with 10 teenagers soon grew to accommodate dozens. They came from every direction: city shelters, reform schools, broken homes. Some arrived angry, others afraid, but they all left changed. Daniel was no longer just a writer. He was a mentor, a steward, a witness to small miracles. There was Mateo, the pickpocket from Queens who now taught woodworking to younger kids. And Alina, once mute from trauma, who spoke her first full sentence while planting carrots. And Dante, 16, who showed Daniel a bruised notebook filled with poems. "Who taught you to write like this?" Daniel asked him one night after reading a particularly gut-wrenching piece. Dante shrugged. "No one. I just started listening. Like you said in your book, listen to what hurts, and right there." Daniel smiled. "Then you're already halfway home." Victor, for his part, had softened in ways Daniel never imagined possible. He could often be found in the barn helping the kids learn carpentry, or in the kitchen, still ruining Lena's biscuit recipe, or walking slowly through the orchard, lost in thought. He had started writing too, not for the world, but for himself. Small entries, reflections, things he wished he'd said. One evening, Daniel found him asleep in the rocker with a journal in his lap. The page read, "Being a father isn't about authority. It's about availability. I wish I'd known that when he was 5, but I'm grateful I'm learning it now." Daniel didn't wake him. He just tucked a blanket over his father's shoulders and sat beside him as the stars wheeled silently above. On the 4th anniversary of Lena's passing, a letter arrived. It was from a woman named Rebecca Chun, a documentary filmmaker from Seattle. She had read The Soil Remembers and wanted to create a feature-length documentary not just about Lena, but about the journey, the transformation, and the legacy Daniel and Victor were building. Daniel was hesitant at first. "This place isn't a show," he told her. "It's sacred. It's real. Cameras change people." But Rebecca wasn't interested in glamour. She visited, lived there for 2 weeks, didn't record a single second, just helped clean out stalls, listened, watched, and wept the first time she heard Mateo tell his story to a group of 5th graders. "You're right," she said finally. "This isn't a story. It's a seed." They gave her permission. And 6 months later, The Farmer's Lesson premiered at Sundance to a standing ovation. Not for the celebrity, not for the artistry, but for the truth of it. The film ended not with Lena's death or Daniel's fame, but with a shot of dozens of kids planting trees in her orchard, their hands covered in soil, their faces lifted toward the light. After the documentary aired, something shifted. People came. Not tourists, not fans. Pilgrims. They brought grief, questions, memories, wounds. And in return, the farm offered them what Lena had given Daniel: quiet, space, dignity, dirt, and time. A woman who had just lost her husband came and spent a week in the garden, never speaking, just weeding and crying. A retired soldier suffering from PTSD stayed in the bunkhouse, eventually leading morning meditations with the kids. Even a former hedge fund CEO came and helped mend fences with hands that had never once touched wood. Everyone came broken. Everyone left a little more whole. Daniel kept writing. Victor kept building. The land kept healing. One cold November morning, Victor didn't come down for breakfast. Daniel knocked gently on his door. No answer. He opened it slowly. Victor lay peacefully in bed, hands folded over his chest, a small photo of Daniel and Lena beside him. There was no struggle, no fear, just rest. On his nightstand was a final note. "Tell him I loved him, even when I didn't know how to show it. And thank Lena for teaching me how." Daniel sat at the edge of the bed and wept, not like a boy mourning a father he never had, but like a man saying goodbye to the one he finally did. Victor was buried under the same oak tree as Lena, at his request. The funeral was simple. Daniel spoke only briefly. He started as a man who built towers. He ended as one who built bridges. I was lucky to walk across one of them. Afterward, Daniel sat alone beneath the tree for a long while. He pressed his palm to the soil between the two graves and whispered, "I'm still here. I'm still learning. I hope you're both proud." In the years that followed, the farm became more than just a place. It became a movement. New locations opened in other towns, urban farms, mentorship centers, creative sanctuaries, all bearing the name Morgan House. Daniel traveled between them, sometimes to teach, sometimes to speak, always to listen. He still lived in the farmhouse, though. Alone, but not lonely. He had loved. He had lost. He had been the arrogant son, the reluctant student, the broken man, the grateful witness. And now, he was the teacher, just as Lena had once been. One late autumn evening, an older version of Daniel sat on the same porch Lena used to rock on. A young girl, 12, freckled, new to the program, approached quietly with a notebook. "I don't get why we have to write every day," she muttered. Daniel gestured to the chair beside him. "You ever see something so beautiful it hurt a little?" She shrugged. "Once, when my mom smiled for real. Before she got sick." Daniel nodded. "That's what writing does. It catches those moments so they don't slip away." She was quiet for a long time, then finally whispered, "I'm scared to remember." Daniel reached over, gently closed her notebook. "Start by writing what you're willing to forget." She smiled, tears welling. And for the first time since arriving, she hugged him. That night, Daniel walked out to the orchard. The trees stood tall now, full and strong. The ones the kids had planted 5 years ago, some bore fruit already. He ran a hand along the trunk of one. It had a carving on it. L+D = grace. He laughed softly. "She'd have hated that," he said to the wind. But the wind didn't disagree. He sat down at the base of the tree and opened his journal. "Final chapter," he wrote. But then he paused, smiled. He crossed out final and replaced it with ongoing. Then he began. "This all started with a lesson, a punishment, really. But what I got wasn't discipline. It was a map. And the woman who drew it didn't raise her voice or break my spirit. She just made space. And in that space, I found my name again." He wrote long into the night, the moon climbing high, the orchard rustling with wind and memory. The next morning, the kids found Daniel asleep under the tree, journal still open on his chest, pen fallen beside him, peace wrapped around him like sunlight. They didn't wake him. They just sat nearby, picked apples, and wrote in their own notebooks. Because the lesson had already been passed on. And the story, Lena's story, Daniel's story, Victor's story, was no longer his alone. It belonged to all of them now. And it would keep growing, season by season, life by life. Just like the soil always promised.